Workplace violence in general is nothing new. I know the statistics. I think it's something like 37-40% of Australians report being sworn or yelled at in the workplace. The mental stress claims made by workers is something between 20 and 30%. I mean, these are not good statistics.
Welcome to the business behind your business. Conversations to help your business grow and thrive. Hi, I'm Paul Sweeney, founder of Terrorism Solutions, chartered accountants and certified business advisors, hosting the business behind your business. Welcome to the business behind your business. I'm your host, Paul Sweeney, chartered accountant and business advisor. And today we have on the microphone Steve Curtis from the Head First. Now, Steve's story or his background is quite interesting and leads into why he's a very good person to have on to talk about our subject today. And the subject has come up because we're in this situation where we're moving out of lockdown, returning back to face-to-face environments, but there are a lot of, restrictions still or implications and requirements, and a lot of it around the vaccine, unvaccinated side. And look, let's face it, there's going to be some issues, there's going to be some conflict, there's going to be some tension. And what we're going to talk about today is how we actually, not so much deal with that, but how we can, the word is de-escalate the conflict situation. And Steve's nodding at me, so that's a good start. I'm on topic here. So, Steve Curtis, welcome to the microphone. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I mean, it's great to do this. It's obviously a very topical subject at the moment. So I moved with my family from the UK in 2019. I was a police officer in the Metropolitan Police in London for 22 years. I was in 3 separate units. So I started off like all police officers do, as on an emergency response team, dealing with your emergency calls, robbers, burglars, domestic violence, that kind of thing. I think the critical difference between the British police and the Australian police is we're not armed. We don't carry a firearm, so your de-escalation skills need to be pretty good. I think the British police are probably more than anywhere else need to be very good at that. But I did move on from that, and I moved on to the Specialist Firearms department, which is a unit called CO19. I dealt with possibly a different calibre of criminal there, sort of organised gangs and so on, armed criminality. And then finally I moved on to a unit called the Royalty and Specialist Protection Command, which are, for want of a better expression, the bodyguards who look after the royal family and high-ranking members of the British government, which included the Prime Minister, and I looked after Theresa and then Boris Johnson thereafter. We moved to Australia. My wife's Australian, and we set about sort of creating a better life for our kids. We've got 2 little boys. And I think that this started because I just was going to do a blog. I was just going to write down some basic safety tips on how you can look after yourself when you're out and about based on what I used to do. And then it sort of turned into something a bit more. I realised that there was a bit of a gap in the market. In traditional self-defence courses, they tend to teach techniques that you wait to be attacked and then hope that you can kick and punch your way out of it. So I thought, well, you're kind of missing the bigger part of that, which is just avoid it in the first place. And it's very much what I used to do as a protection officer. Our job was to avoid confrontation rather than, it's not like the movies. We don't go sort of looking for trouble. We try to avoid it in the first place. So I started Head First Personal Safety. It takes all of the experience and skills that I learned in the police and makes it into a digestible package for anybody to learn to be able to look after themselves.
Look, that's a fascinating background, and I'm sure we could talk for hours just about your experience there and some great stories that you would share. But you mentioned that you were unarmed, like the British police are unarmed, and that has got to require some amazing, I would say, courage or confidence in your own abilities to talk to somebody. You'd be put in some difficult situations.
Yeah, I think so. I think the majority of British police officers they've never known anything different. And you join with that expectation. We've had police officers from other countries, Australia included, in the United States, who find it incomprehensible that we would go out without a firearm of any kind and go to the calls that we do. But the truth is, if you've never known anything different, and if that's your expectation when you join, then that's what it is, and you accept it. I mean, certainly, I did it for 6 years. I was an unarmed officer and dealt with like I said, robbers, burglars, knife point. I've been threatened with virtually everything you can think of. And I can't say I'm keen on fighting, but it was part of the job. Now, if I could, I would always try and de-escalate a situation. And I picked up little bits of tips and things as I was doing it that I realised were going to work better than other things. So yes, it was certainly challenging. And I worked in Whitechapel, which is the east end of London. It was a very steep learning curve, but very rewarding at the same time.
Mm. So the critical skill is how to avoid the conflict through your, I won't say negotiation, that's probably not the right word, but how you actually interact with the person that is aggrieved or upset. And that's a skill that really I think more and more of us are going to have need for, particularly when we talked about this situation of reopening and we've got this brewing conflict or I guess this uncertainty about how people are going to respond with some of the new rules. So the skills that you've acquired, what sort of situations in like a business situation, I think retail probably is the easiest one to talk about to start with. How would your skills translate to somebody in retail?
Well, I mean, it's obviously very topical at the moment. We know we're going to be opening up next week. And certainly the retail industry and shops and things, they've had a bit of a rough time of it. And it hasn't just started with the pandemic. Workplace violence in general is nothing new. I know the statistics. I think it's something like 40% of Australians report being sworn or yelled at in the workplace. The mental stress claims made by workers is something between 20 and 30%. I mean, these are not good statistics, and this was before the pandemic, and it was on the increase even before, and it's since been reported that the number of times that people are getting verbally abused or assaulted has doubled during the crisis. So, I think certainly at the moment this is something we need to address, and these are people that we claim to recognise as essential key workers. They were out there helping us when it was really quite a desperate times, and all they were doing was, saying you're enforcing basic limits on buying things or wearing a face mask. And next week we're going to give them some more responsibility by saying that you have to enforce a government mandate about being vaccinated or unvaccinated, with either no training or training that isn't fit for purpose. So being able to talk to people and be able to de-escalate verbally aggressive individuals, I think, is a really good skill to learn at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And I think we try to distance ourselves from that and say, well, hang on, that's only going to happen in supermarkets or retail, but it does happen broader. But I think we all know somebody. Like if I sent my 17-year-old son to work at Coles or Woolies and he's on the checkout, it's pretty much guaranteed these days, unfortunately, that at some stage he's going to be abused by a hostile customer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can speak from experience. Look, as a police officer, it doesn't make it acceptable. It doesn't make it right, but it's a fairly regular occurrence. So there's an expectation as a police officer. Before very long, you are going to have to deal with confrontation. But yeah, as you said, if you're a 16, 17-year-old, that's your weekend job. You shouldn't have to put up with that. It's not acceptable. And I think that the problem is that we're now expecting them almost to take on a security role, or at least we need to explain better that they're not there for that, and that if they are confronted with that, there are certain things that they can do to protect themselves.
Well, we're not going to be able to address the whole issue of is society becoming more violent or impatient or hostile in general, but I think what's important, and look, drawing on your experience here would be great, is let's have a look at some of the issues in terms of what are our employees expected to do and what can we actually expect them to do and what support should an employer give the employee?
Well, I mean, firstly, I think we need to be clear what de-escalation is. There are a lot of benefits of learning how to de-escalate a situation or effectively deal with conflict, confrontation, but it's good for your business in terms of it can prevent any financial cost. The human cost is obvious. You can stop, if it's effective, it will stop your staff getting assaulted, getting injured, the long-term costs. But I think you have to remember that the primary focus of de-escalation is to prevent your staff getting injured. And through that, you need to understand what the policy is. So my understanding from what I've read on the New South Wales website is that businesses are responsible for taking reasonable steps for preventing unvaccinated people from entering your premises. I think the key word there is reasonable. No one's saying that you have to turn into Judge Dredd and start barring people from coming in and that kind of thing. The website actually gives examples. It says you should display prominent signs, QR codes, check for valid vaccination or an exemption status. But if you've done that, if you've said, it's a requirement of entry, and they've said, yeah, I don't care, I'm coming in, then you've fulfilled your part of it. You've done what you can. You're not there to start manhandling people and dragging them out. That's down to either security if you've got them, or more importantly, the police. As long as you understand, I think there has to be a very strong understanding between the management and your frontline workers that not too much is expected of them, not to put themselves in a situation where they're going to get hurt. You make the requirement, and that's it. It's not for you to get to put yourself in physical danger.
And I think the other thing is, we mentioned injury before, and we're talking obviously about physical injury, but there's a lot of emotional damage that can be done by a hostile customer.
Yeah.
And I guess the techniques to avoid that as well.
Yeah, look, hopefully people won't put themselves in that position, but de-escalation is also because some people, this is obviously a very divisive topic, and some people are just going to want to vent because they can't vent directly to policymakers. So you're going to become almost literally their verbal and physical punching bag to take it out on you, and they're not going to be detracted. So there are de-escalation covers. It needs a good, strong foundation of personal safety, of situational awareness, and it's not difficult to do, but some people can get tripped up on certain things of not doing it.
And so, would you say that the employer or the business owner has a responsibility to look after the welfare of their employees?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we know that it's actually written into, that's actually a legal requirement, isn't it, that you have to provide a safe workplace free of hazards. Now, that's open to interpretation as to what free of hazards is, but now that with the mandate being brought in for refusing entry to unvaccinated, I would say businesses are between a rock and a hard place. They're expected to provide a safe environment, but they're essentially almost provoking an unsafe environment. Now, that's not the business's fault, and I understand why it's necessary regardless of which side of the fence you sit on. But you're asking a lot of, like you said, a 16-year-old who's been put out front and centre and told you're going to check for proof of that they can come in.
So there's obviously going to be some benefits in training employees or giving them some guidance on how to handle this situation. So what do you see as those benefits?
Well, I mean, firstly, there's obviously that you're going to, first and foremost, you're protecting the physical and mental well-being of your employees. They are going to be, if you've never been, I'm 48 years old. I was in the police for 22 years, so I'm old and cynical and that kind of thing, so I can put up with a certain degree of abuse. But if you've never been subject to verbal abuse or physical abuse, it's incredibly disconcerting the first time it happens. It's upsetting. You will see it can affect people for a long time afterwards. It can lead to stress, anxiety, a lack of confidence. They might not want to come back. That's just the mental health issues. They can be long-term. I've read reports in the news that people have been suffering from PTSD from the kind of abuse that they've been receiving. And then you're dealing with things like, broken bones, and people have had knives, they've been stabbed, they've had been hit with bottles. So that's the human cost. And if that wasn't bad enough, then you're looking at the financial long-term costs. You're going to have to, the company's maybe going to have to deal with sickness, medical bills, that kind of thing, maybe compensation claims. From another point of view, we all know what happens when a fight breaks out. People break out the cameras and start filming you. So regardless of whether you're in the right or not, it's very often, you're going to be filmed. And that's not something you want your business associated with. So there's that to think about as well. So, yeah, I think it's really, for a little bit, investing in your employees' safety and giving them training and a strategy can prevent you having to pay out considerably more if they do come under attack. And de-escalation in particular, calming a person down, even if it's just until the police arrive, it can be hugely more effective than just teaching your staff how to defend themselves physically.
Well, that's great. So we've talked about the need for it and why it's arising and what are the benefits. But I think, and you mentioned just then, calming people down actually is involved in that process of de-escalating. What's the process that you would employ?
Okay, so as we already said, it's to protect you. To protect you as the individual, the person who's going to have to deal with this from verbal abuse and physical harm. It's not to enforce government policy. This is to protect you. So if you have got somebody who isn't going to, just leave you to it, or the police can't deal with it at that point, they're on the way or whatever, then effective de-escalation is built on a foundation of a number of things. The first one of those is personal safety. So it's 5 essential points. The first one's personal safety. If you know the environment you're going to be in when confrontation is likely, you need a plan of where to retreat to. This is just your safety net. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're in a restaurant, store, hotel, a warehouse, an outside event, or even someone's house. The 2 most important things you need to identify are cover. Okay? Can you put anything between you to create a barrier if someone starts to become aggressive? It can be anything: a table, counter, a sofa, a vehicle if it's outside. Not advocating that you move the vehicle, you move around the vehicle. And it doesn't have to be fixed. I mean, moving subtly behind a shopping trolley or using a chair as a shield, it might not work for long, but it creates an obstruction to a sudden attack. It creates time and distance, and it reduces the opportunity for an attacker to get hold of you. The second thing is entrance and exits. Wherever you're positioned at work, know where your nearest way to safety is. If there's a door between you and safety, know which way it opens and how to unlock it or lock it quickly behind you. I mean, it's quite topical if you think back to the Lindt cafe siege in Sydney in 2014. Some of the hostages escaped towards the end because one of the staff managed to work out how to release the emergency release button on the door. Okay, if you're working somewhere day in, day out, you think it's never going to happen, but you need to know how to get out of somewhere quickly. Okay, because that staff member, he did very well. I take nothing away from him, but apparently he did pry at the door because he didn't realise that he needed to press the button to release it. So be aware, have a look around. It's not just your workplace. If you go into the gym and you're looking at these places, just make sure that you know how to get out of somewhere, or you know where it is quickly. The second thing is make time for it. If you've got a calm and angry or aggressive person down, you have to work at the speed of the person you're dealing with, not your own speed. Effective de-escalation takes time. And you might have other customers waiting, but if you come across as impatient or inattentive to their needs because you're multitasking, I guarantee you're going to make that worse. They need to become the centre of your world, not just for safety, but also to ensure you're not going to miss the opportunity to solve the problem. You don't want to neglect other customers, so because you don't want one person turning into several, one angry person turning into several. So have a plan in place where if you have to deal with an aggressive person, someone else can take over from you, so that you can devote your time to sort of dealing with that situation. The third thing is control your breathing. And I cannot emphasize this enough. It's merely because it's often neglected. And 2 reasons you need to practice getting this under control. First, it controls the body. Okay, you'll get it when this happens to you and somebody is, giving you abuse and they're throwing swear words at you and they're threatening what they're going to do to you. You will get a huge surge of adrenaline, and it will affect you in a number of ways. You'll get a rapid heart rate, you'll shallow breathing, you might start shaking, you'll get a thing called perceptual distortion, or you've got tunnel vision, you'll get auditory exclusion. It's quite an unpleasant feeling. Now, these are all your body's response to getting you ready to fight, but you want to avoid that. So it's important controlling your breathing can get your body under control. The second reason to do it is because it helps focusing your mind on your breathing when someone is screaming abuse at you. Helps because you're focused on your breathing, you're not focused on the insults that they're giving you to try and get you to react. And that's what it is. Usually most insults are there to get you to react, to provoke a response. So I teach a thing called box breathing, which is just you breathe in for the count of 4, hold your breath for the count of 4, and breathe out for the count of 4. And if you're focusing on that breathing, you're not focusing on the insults they're going to give you. Because when somebody's shouting abuse at you and they're saying what they're going to do, they're not giving you anything that you can use to try and diffuse the situation. They're trying to provoke a response, and that's what you're trying to avoid. Which brings me on to the fourth thing, which is control your response. Okay, if you Google cycle of conflict or Batari's box, it's a thing which is probably common sense, but it teaches that my response will affect your response, which affects my response, and so on. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. So it will just continue until you manage until either punches start being thrown or you manage to calm the situation down. So understand that insults feel personal, but they're not. I know that's easier said than done. I've been insulted and threatened more times than I can remember. I know what it feels like. Someone may threaten to do unspeakable things to you or your loved ones, but in a customer hospitality relationship, it's doubtful they know if those people even exist. And if that doesn't work, there's another way of thinking about it, is if you were in that shop or store and you weren't in that service role, they probably wouldn't be saying anything to you. They'd be ignoring you. So therefore, they're angry at the position you're in. They're not angry at you. Okay, so getting abuse as a police officer never bothered me because I understood people were shouting at the uniform and what it represented, not at me. So get into the idea of thinking of you and job you as two different people. This isn't about you. It never is. And also remember that your goal is to de-escalate the situation, not win an argument. For those, people who are married will know this better than anyone, but you can be 100% in the right and have all the facts to prove it, but you're still fighting afterwards. Okay, being right will not necessarily de-escalate a situation, and the reason for that, for the fact that even if you can prove you're completely in the right, is that most people don't like to be made to feel stupid, or they might feel that they've been condescended to. So de-escalating a situation and winning an argument are two entirely different things. Don't get them confused. Okay, you're trying to de-escalate, not win. Which brings me to the second part, which the final part, the fifth part, which is deal with the emotion, not the issue. There's a temptation to go look down the customer service line, whereby if somebody has got a problem with something, you'll try and solve that problem for them. So you and I are talking now. We're talking calmly. We're using a part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. Now, under normal situations, that's the conscious part of our brain that's rational. It's a decision maker, and that's all very good. But when someone's angry, or more importantly, when they're really in a rage, they're really angry, part of the brain called the amygdala, which is the survival part of your brain, takes over. And that is not capable of rational thought. It's also really bad at articulating how it feels. So it's a bit like talking to the wrong department. You're trying to, even with somebody who's really angry, if you're trying to solve the problem, they're not listening because they're not using that part of the brain that is able to, come up with a solution. So it's actually called an amygdala hijack because it literally shuts down the rest of the brain that can do rational thinking. So the first thing you have to do is address how they're feeling. You have to, and it can be something really simple. It can be something like, hey, look, I can see you're angry. I can see that you're really upset. And if you're lucky, that might be enough just to calm them down, that you've acknowledged, that you've validated how they feel. Chances are they'll probably still be angry, but you stick with it and just give it another go and say, look, I can see you're frustrated. I can see you're disappointed, upset. I can see that you feel isolated. And eventually, when you start to get down to the real reason why they're angry, you'll see a slight change. You'll see them drop their shoulders. You'll see maybe them just breathe out slightly. You might even see them agree. They might say, yeah, of course I feel angry. Of course I feel frustrated. And as soon as you've got that word yes, that means that you've probably now been transferred to the right department. The prefrontal cortex has come back online. That person is now open to trying to discuss how you can resolve this situation. And what I would do is then capitalize on that a little bit. So maybe say something like, look, let's figure this out. What's your name? Let's take a seat. Let's have a chat about this. And that strengthens the connection even more. You're now basically you're showing that you're willing to invest time in them to sort this out. And that makes you're starting to see it from their point of view. So if you can use those 5 points, if you follow those 5 points, you stand a much better chance of bringing somebody down from hitting the ceiling. So there are other things you can do, but that's what I think is the core foundation of de-escalation.
No, that's great, Steve. Thanks for sharing that. I think one thing that really jumped out there is that we're talking about de-escalating. We're not talking about winning an argument. And I think too often we're putting this us versus them. Is the customer right, or are we right, or are they being unreasonable? But it's about de-escalating, removing that conflict, getting people to calm down. Yeah. And I think that is more achievable for a lot of people.
I mean, I think it's important. The way you can think of that is that it doesn't really matter what your opinion is. You're seeking a connection with someone who sees the world differently to you. That's what you're trying to do. It doesn't really matter what political side of the fence, whether you think, to be topical again, whether vaccinated or unvaccinated, that people should be allowed in. It really doesn't matter. You're not validating their behaviour. They may be behaving like a child. They might be jumping up and down and getting angry. You're not validating their behaviour or even agreeing with their opinion. What you're doing is saying, I can see you're angry, which is inarguable. You can't tell people that they're not feeling how they do. You're not arguing with their reasons. You're just saying, yes, I can see you're angry. And the process is rooted in the fact that when people are angry, they find it hard to articulate how they feel. And so they're frustrated at being able to be understood. So by defining that feeling for them, by showing them, you're almost lending them your prefrontal cortex while they haven't got access to it and saying, this is how you feel, isn't it? And by doing that, you're showing an understanding. Now, nothing's 100%. You might still get some people who are just not going to go with it. But in my experience and using it on the streets and as a police officer, it worked more often than not, or considerably more often than not.
That's great. Look, what you've shared, I think, is a great first step. Those 5 points, a great first step in understanding what we should be doing. So I won't say if, I think when we're confronted with a situation, because I think it's become more and more prevalent. But I think really to give your employees the best situation possible or the best skills possible, I think there's more training that should be given to employees. And I think you would agree with that, because I think that is your business to train.
Well, yeah. I mean, and you've got to remember the benefits of it. I've had someone this morning call up interested in me speaking and teaching her staff about dealing with workplace violence and dealing with the dangers around it. And it's because she really cares about her staff. She's willing to invest in this because she's worried about them. She's concerned that they're going to face this, and she wants to give them something to show that even though she's not going to be there all the time, she does care about how they are. Because let's not forget, obviously, the techniques, personal safety techniques, aren't just for work. They're there for you when you're on your commute to and from work. They're there in your own personal life. So I think it's really important. It's a really important skill, and that you can use at any time.
Yeah, so certainly worth investing in as an employer or a business owner. The question we now have, Steve, is how do we get in contact with you?
Well, so I'm just about to put something out, actually, a template on how to deal with de-escalation based on the things that I've just spoken on. It's completely free. I realise that money and time are tight. We're going to open up next week. This will basically summarise everything I've been talking about. But in addition to that, I'm on LinkedIn. Reach out to me there, or you can contact me at steve@headfirst.com.au or Headfirst Personal Safety, which is the website, www.theheadfirst.com.au.
Great, fantastic. And we'll put links to all of those contact details for Steve and the Head First in the show notes. And we hopefully will be able to grab a copy of that guide and make that available to our listeners as well through the the show notes. Fantastic. Steve, this has been a great conversation, but a really practical one with some practical advice for businesses and their employees. And look, I think it's a first step. I think we have to realise there's a problem and start at the beginning. But there's certainly a real need for more training on this. And it's great that you are leaping into it and actually providing that service to business owners. I encourage people to get in contact with you, because I think there's going to be more and more need for it. We're just not going to avoid conflict completely.
No, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, I don't think this is going to go away once we, open up to everybody on the 1st December. Workplace violence is on the increase. So I think it's just giving people an input is something that will pay back in a big dividend.
Yeah, absolutely. Your employees are one of your greatest assets as a business owner, and looking after them must be one of your top priorities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thank you, Steve. Thank you again for joining us on the Business Behind Your Business, for the great tips you've shared. And look, I encourage people to get in contact with Steve at the Head First, and the contact details for Steve will be in the show notes, along with a link to the resource. So once again, thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for listening. Do you have a question you'd like our team of experts to answer? If you do, send your question to podcast@thebusinessbehindyourbusiness.com. To hear more from The Business Behind Your Business, don't forget to subscribe using your favourite podcast player. Or you can visit the businessbehindyourbusiness.com website.